Welcome to the Heart of Soul podcast, an exploration of who you are, what you are, and why you are, offering new ways to investigate age-old questions at the heart of you. Greetings, it's Joseph, and thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. In today's episode, we continue our conversation from last time about reincarnation. We move from the macro more to the micro and discuss how we set up incarnations in our self-interest for soul-level healing, how at the deepest level there's no victimhood at all in life whatsoever, the nature of karma in the context of reincarnation and self-forgiveness, and how as we unconsciously sow, we consciously reap. I know I say this a lot, but this was a particularly rich conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Also, a quick announcement, Eric Grace, who I've mentioned before, if you've been listening in order, is now leading Emotivity Circles. It's a bi-weekly group that uses emotive body ensoulment in the tradition of identity. For more information on that, visit eric-grace.com, eric-grace.com. I remind you, as always, to please listen to this podcast from the beginning and in order. Thanks so much for listening. Well, greetings, listeners, and welcome forward to another exciting installment, which I can only say ironically, but also truthfully. I don't know what I'm talking about. Hi, Stace. Hi.
Greetings.
Well, we're back here, and we're going to follow up with some questions that I had that I thought we should cover about consciousness and reincarnation, and you have some things as well that you saw that were worthy of discussing. Do you want to start with what you had on your mind, or the questions?
No, I'd like to follow that up because your questions are always so incisive, even when they're hard to put words to, and so I'd like to play off that today, if that's okay.
My questions are incisively ineffable. That's
nice. Ineffably incisive.
Yeah, I would say. like a really good Cabernet.
I've yet to find a really good Cabernet.
Yes.
But, yeah.
Nice.
But, yes.
That's a whole other rabbit hole. So
yes.
I don't know what I've got a few things I wrote down here. I don't know what the best order is for them. But I think maybe I'll just start with the top one, EBE, which were emotive body ensoulment. I think one of the things that's really remarkable about it is that, as opposed to therapy that is focused on this life issues, and most therapeutic paradigms don't paradigmatically include past life issues or the spiritual in general, how does EBE process past life issues, and how does that work?
Oh, great question. Yeah, because identity holds in that something that can be self-verified over time, if you're curious enough, that based on the starting place that we're emotive beings before we are willful beings, mental beings, or physical beings, means that being human is inherently spiritual, in the sense that if everything, as all the teachers have said, and identity would, of course, would agree, that whatever divinity is, or God, it is love in some way that we cannot fathom, but has a quality of love as its main signature bandwidth. And if that's the case, and we're all children of it, and since love is an emotive dynamic, not a mental or physical or a willful dynamic, that means we're all emotive and love-based first also. What this means is that as we explore local wounded emotions and help heal them into their healed correlate, a lot of times what will happen is a past life where a similar kind of wound was engendered 500, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago is showing up this lifetime as part of what the soul, who is doing EBE, brought in to heal, because it's been sitting there for a couple thousand years and never had the right format to be recapitulated and healed. So many times there's multi dimensions to people's wounded emotional states just from this life that for sensitive people who have a gift of third eye, or even if they don't, the third eye of the facilitator. Oftentimes we'll say, well, I'm getting a picture of you in this scenario that's very different than your one from childhood, this life, but it carries exactly the same theme. So they go hand in hand. And I would be hard pressed to say there ever was an EBE facilitant who didn't have past life issues come up consciously and thematically in their personhood work.
Yeah. And then it's actually an enormous subject because it's so big it's hard to get my mind much less my mouth around right now. It's because what we're saying here is that we I don't know where to start. What we're saying here is that we choose to become human in order to work on issues. We bring forward past life issues. And that's a wholly different frame than we're here to have the experience of being human, and there's some childhood wounds that, get in the way of our happiness that have to be dealt with. It's a wholly different frame, is that we've actually chosen our family, chosen our gender, our Enneagram type, our astrological sign, which I want to ask about what we used to call the DMV of incarnational attribute ordering, or whatever it is, because
yeah, let's do that.
We can't talk about all of what we're talking about without talking about that frame, which is a wholly different frame from strict non-dual,
Yes.
which would say reincarnation, who cares? Well, you don't experience that, so forget it. Or a scientific based psychology that says this is your one life, and why would you use your imagination to focus on anything else? We have a wholly different frame for that, which I think is particularly important. One thing that comes to mind is when people have a really difficult time moving an issue in themselves.
Yes.
I would guess it very often is because it's not just this life, and so it's they think it's a 1 pound rock they got to pick up, and it's actually a 500-pound boulder.
Yes, exactly right. And we have all the depthful space to treat that directly. When we have a past life issue that is really compelling, Joseph, we even have a category. We call it a parapersona. A parapersona of the local personality version of the soul that is doing the EBE at that moment is maybe it's recalcitrant. It's been layered over with coping mechanisms for 1,000 years, but something compelling in the present life triggers it up, and there's the parapersona right there. And so,
and it has to, right? There has to be a this life trigger in order to bring it forward. It won't just come forward on its own.
No. And that's exactly what I meant, another dimension to the incarnational imperative plan that we all make ahead of time. We garner up a certain segment of our soul history unhealed issues and bring them forward to be recapitulated and triggered in the present life. And a good metaphor for that is what a real vaccine, a good vaccine, is supposed to do is a lot.
What we used to call vaccines.
What we used to call vaccines, yes. Jonas Salk and the boys, where a small segment of a live virus is injected in to cause a physical body immune response to it, to help ward off future exposures. Same principle here. What we do is we bring forward the live virus of an unhealed issue from another life, oftentimes which has a whole persona to it. And when introduced to a facilitant, they'll get their own story and begin to pouring this out, and they don't know where it's coming from. No need to do a past life regression, in other words. The EBE process includes past lives because that's how the system works. We bring forward on purpose. I had a past life as a priest in the French Revolution, and I helped the resistance. And I died that life with a cannonball coming through the church wall. I was a priest, and getting a cannonball right in the middle of my torso. It didn't blow a hole and blow me apart. It pushed me back into a wall where I was crushed to death from the impact. And that explained why whenever there were cannon blasts when I was a kid, I would run for cover and I didn't
Uh,
know why, right?
mm-hmm,
So those kinds of things can come up really directly because we factor them in. We
mm-hmm.
choose families very carefully and dynamical probabilities that are all play outable in divine beings supercomputer, if you want to use a silly metaphor, that matches up the soul experience of parents with the soul experience of a child being wanted to be born to that family, and so that it's calibrated so that there are triggers for these past life issues. We can say we're not done healing at all unless we find in some way some exposure of past life issues coming forward. It is possible that we might stay all local on an EBE track and confident that if it's working really well without a lot of hiccups, that we are handling all the past life front load that came in with the issues. But this is a great question because there's no separate past life regression stuff that's half hypnosis and half suggestion,
Mm-hmm.
which causes all sorts of projections and inaccuracies in a person's journey. When you have the emotivity as the algorithm of exposure, there's very little distortion either in denying the past life or in overindulging it and maybe adorning it with some extra positives.
Because you're going through the door of soul rather than through the mind or the local personality. So it's like, in one way, we could say EBE is therapy for the soul, which
Yes,
makes it automatically spiritual. But
exactly.
the reason many therapeutic modalities would not get to past life issues is because they're not going through the door of soul. They're going through a mind mediated frame and looking at this life only. So it doesn't invite the soul themes forward.
Exactly. All of our therapy now is either based on I think, therefore I am, I have a body, therefore I am, or I am energy, therefore I am.
Mm.
All of those are downstream to emotivity and identity's offering. So none of them are going to be free of distortion, projection, or rejection because we're bypassing the mind here and going
Yeah.
for feeling-based reality, which points to, and that's why we call it ensoulment instead of emotional body enlightenment. It's an emotional body ensoulment where we bring our wounds forward from other lives and triggered up by our present situation, and we're off to the races in healing.
I want to share personally. I've talked before about my father in previous podcasts. So here's a great example. If you've been listening to the podcast in order, this will make sense to you. If you've been breaking the rules, then you'll be lost. But no, I'll recap. So when I started what is now EBE, I was very much past life agnostic, leaning toward the cynical and probably disbelieving it. And it was through the process of the work that I started to actually experience past life memories. And now some of my past life memories look a lot like my this life memories. They look kind of similar, which is an eerie kind of feeling. And through the work, as you well know, I discovered a past life in which my father died before I was born.
Yes.
And that was sort of correlated to the very absent ghost-like father I had. And we framed that as like this was to recapitulate some of that abandonment sort of orphan theme, because that in that life I was kind of semi an orphan. And then years
Yes.
later, I would discover that actually my father wasn't even my father, that I was sperm donor conceived. That's to me under the category of you can't make this shit up.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
soul,
Uh-huh.
I intuit that I chose for that to happen.
Yes.
Maybe that's a good foray into how on earth does that happen, and how does
Yeah.
it work? Why do we do that? What's that process look like?
It's a proactive, courageous acknowledgement that here's what I went through. Did not have a chance to resolve this particular emotive based issue that also could have involved impacts on others and also a whole scenario. Um, and For a soul to say, I want to re experience this in some way in a compelling present life scenario that may or may not take me back to there, may or may not, but I want to heal this so badly that I want to re-experience the trauma that I either was subjected to or that I caused in another lifetime. And I want it put right into my face. I want it to hinder my life to such a degree that I seek help for it. That's the point of it. And so the way that works is we literally choose, we upload, if I can use it that way, upload past life thematic perpetrations or victimhoods, and sometimes in things in between, into our incarnational imperative to be triggered by the vagaries and wound bases and defenses of our parents. So it becomes part of our life, melded into this life, what was unresolved before. So when that happens, it can be really overwhelmingly difficult. But that's why we try to help at the person's pace. We don't up front diagnose a ton of past life issues and how they correlate. We wait for them to emerge mostly, and then we can work with them. So, but again, because it's based in emotivity, the whole Dharma has way less compensatory self-imagic projections on past lives. Not everyone were famous people. I myself have had hundreds of completely nondescript lives where I was learning the ropes of what it means to be human, right? So, but occasionally there are people who come into our picture who were people who we're still talking about in some way. And I have a really compelling example of it. Confidentiality prohibits me from saying who, but I can tell you that a diagnosis of a past life issue came way before this person sought any sort of help. And that was, I happened to have the honor of meeting the reincarnation of Jiddu Krishnamurti. And it explained, when I reflected it to this person, the person was astonished, but not in some way. And it informed so much of this person's world that it became utterly impossible for this person to deny its strong possibility. And this was a famous person, of course. And so that what that person came to heal this life was that Jiddu Krishnamurti never really learned how to integrate the human with his enlightenment, proven by the fact that he had a lover for almost 40 years from people's awareness. So that there's a rare example where sometimes a person will come preloaded with a past life issue, and that will inform the track we start with. But that's the exception rather than the rule.
You can imagine working with such a person's, say, romantic relationship issues would be far more complicated by that past life, right?
Exactly right, because the enlightenment of Jiddu carried forward as in the soul field of the present incarnation, albeit in a very different form and expression, but it was still there, and you could sense it. Those of us who know what that pre-dual, non-dual, not landscape and its ramifications when it finds you, this person needed another facilitator. In that case, it was me way back when in the day, who knew what it was like to endure the ramifications of non-dual, pre-dual enlightenment.
Yeah, I remember meeting that person, and their eyes pierced through my soul like lasers. That's not an experience I'll soon forget.
Yes, we had a falling out, that person and I, for some not unreasonable but not very reasonable reasons. And that person threw that diagnosis of the baby out with the bathwater that Stace was just some wacko. And I found out later, really interestingly, that this person went to another psychic at one point, years later. And the psychic said immediately, as soon as this person walked in the door, "My God, you're the reincarnation of Jiddu Krishnamurti."
kidding me?
So no, I swear. And that then she couldn't throw all of the baby out with the
Mm.
bathwater about her experience with me.
Well,
So
I understand. I got a diagnosis from you once that I tried to throw out with some bathwater, and I spent 6 or 7 years trying to shake it
uh,
and was unsuccessful. And
uh,
that's related to that. We would say similar. I don't think we didn't talk much about soul species yet here, but we did in the clubhouse presentation. We were talking about angel souls and how everybody
right.
wants to be an angel soul except for the people who actually are. And in the same way, everybody wants to have a famous past life except for the people who actually had one,
Yes.
because the amount of baggage that ends up saddling you with is not something you would choose.
No, imagine how it was told that the Buddha was able to walk 10 minutes after birth, and as he walked away from his mother, lotus blossoms blossomed under his feet as he walked, and elephants bowed and snakes covered them from the rain. And at any
Sounds
rate,
kind of what's said about whoever the current leader of North Korea is.
yeah, wow, yeah, that's right. And of course, what people don't talk about in terms of baggage is that he abandoned
Yeah.
his newborn son and his wife to go to heal suffering in the world, not realizing at the time how disembodied he was from his humanity, that the suffering that he caused his son and his wife, and just walking out not proudly and not with a reason that he tried to negotiate with them in the middle of the night,
Mm.
like a thief leaving. Now that doesn't in any way undermine Gautama's or Siddhartha's seminal contribution to
Hmm.
the evolution of consciousness, but there's always a backstory baggage to
Yeah.
every famous person. Talk to people who actually worked for Mother Teresa. God bless
Mm.
her with all the good work she did in the activism for the poor and the suffering. Yes. And did she have a ton of personal issues? Of course she did.
I've heard the
Um,
same about Oprah.
oh my God. That part of that is probably from my story about Oprah.
Yes, that, but I also met a guy. Oprah, as you may know, owns a lot of land here on Maui and has been snapping up contiguous pieces as much as she can, just buying people out. And I had a friend for a while who was a carpenter working on a 16,000 square foot building
Yeah.
that she was having built. And
Yes.
a lovely person on the screen, and not a very nice person to her workers. Would skip over opportunities to say hello to people, and
Yes.
apparently would have spend thousands of dollars just to move like a light switch 1 inch to the left, which is pretty
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah. And of course, I live in an area near where she lives now, her main
Mm.
home in Montecito.
Oh, right.
And these stories about, she was a psycho spiritual teacher for the masses.
Yeah.
Um, and you got to hand it to her. She got really young souls just getting used to earth life, interested in deeper things than internet influencing and designing derivatives in the financial sector to dupe investors and buyers of the derivatives. So there's always some downside to famous people and famous past life people. So as you said, it's very compelling. If you knew what really happened in the life of Yeshua or Gautama or Oprah or whatever, you would never want to be them because you'd be very embarrassed by what you missed, how deeply you missed stuff. And all those people missed something really deeply from identity's point of view.
And then because they're in leadership positions, they have powerful influences, and their issues, which everybody has, basically get blown up and spilled out over the planet. And they have, what's the Voltaire slash Spider-Man quote: "With great power comes great responsibility," and that's a price that has to be paid.
Yes, absolutely right. You don't you can't have it both ways. You
Yeah.
can't get to where you're going and have downsides to what it took for you to get there, or what you did with it once you got it to follow you. And it's those kinds of things that get repressed under the successes and under the achievements and under the attainments that has to get forwarded to a present life, as so many souls have been waiting finally for some kind of therapeutic remedy that involves spirituality directly, not as a side or simply a context. So this is why we've drawn a lot of angel souls, because they're not served adequately by most models of standard psychotherapy, or even some of the hybrids, modern day hybrids.
So, what actually happens before we incarnate? You've said before we usually set up a few lives in advance. What does that planning process actually look like?
Oh, good question again. Some people, not everyone, sets up an arc of lives, 3 to 7 lives ahead of time, to gradually work a really deep-seated issue that the soul has been burdened with for 1,000 years or more. And what they'll do is prearrange as best as possible a set of parents and countries and parts of countries that will specifically recapitulate the themes of that wound. But that's not, I would say 40% of my memory experience do that. 60, it's just one at a time, or two at a time, mostly, that they do. Uh-huh. And what they do is, what happens is a soul gets a ton of input from their guides, from all sorts of echelons of divine being that they have access to. By the way, when you die, all of a sudden you don't get all of God and all of its wisdom and all of its dimensions. You get what you're able to get with the consciousness, our consciousness frame you're in right now. So I could die at the same moment as someone else, and my version of what I experience after death is going to be very different than the other person's experience of after death. It's not homogeneous, even though there are basic common overlays for everyone, like a feeling of liberation and love everywhere and connection to everything, but very different experiences. So after they get together with their guides, some soul family members, and some heavy-duty divine guidance, it takes about, and I use this metaphorically, there's a what's the word, like a duct work from mm-hmm. when you're purely in spirit to get to the human. You go into a tunnel, you could say, or a funnel, and that lasts about 6 months Earth time. So for 6 months before a child is conceived, their soul has been slowly decompressing to be able to meet that moment when conception will likely take place. A lot of times they're waiting
6 months prior to conception.
Prior to conception, uh-huh. They enter that funnel. Uh-huh. But then they usually arrive, sometimes they arrive a little late, and they've got to do the second intercourse to get conceived, or they because they missed the first one, or they wait a while in the mother's soul field, which a good psychic can pick up. Hey, you've got mm-hmm. a baby to be born here.
That's part of the shine that pregnant women have. There's an extra soul in the field, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. And that's why doctors who are sensitive, and others who are sensitive, can see a woman is pregnant before a woman can.
Yeah.
That's that extra brightness from that mm-hmm. extra soul in there. So what happens is at conception, and I'd like to talk a bit about abortion a little more than I mentioned at the end last time.
Okay.
But they at that moment, the soul extends a little, like a little finger, into the sperm and egg first gamete deal, and then owns that gamete, owns the sperm and the egg coming together, owns it, and then begins to do with it what it needs to do to bring up some physical forms at first that are needed. For example, a healing lifetime might entail cerebral palsy or Down syndrome or anencephaly, something that we would all say is a tragedy, but which was chosen by the soul for very specific reasons. And then so that as that little finger ensouls that gamete more and more and more and more, the whole soul gets absorbed to the place where it's completely surrounding the embryo, just like its fractal, the amniotic sac is
The soul moves from being hanging out in the soul field of the mother to
yes,
surrounding
yes,
the body.
exactly right. Yes. So
Child.
that's basically the process of it. Uh, it's all intentional, almost always. Although there are those brave souls, I've done it a few times. I don't recommend it highly, because you never know what you're going to get. You just dial. You say you don't put any plan out at all, and you say, "I trust you guides. Give me something that'll get me along, but my healing track. But I don't want to know what it is. I want to come fresh."
The
right?
dice rollers.
The dice rollers, right? And of course, if you had it in your mind that you needed, oh, so badly, to be the perfect specimen of man or woman to work through insecure issues, you just got to have that really Adonis or amazing, beautiful woman or man body, so that you can confront how value, inner value, becomes so secondary to outer value, with people worshiping you because you're so beautiful or smart or whatever, only to find out you're born if you were a man, and you thought you've earned your Adonis lifetime, you're born as a person who has got obese genes, a woman in Caracas who lives in the poorest part of Venezuela.
That's sort of the truth to the being reincarnated as a cockroach idea. It's not as a punishment, but as a necessary learning step.
Exactly right. So when you think it might be exactly the opposite, to learn the value of a real bottom-up human self-worth, you can't handle something where you're going to be a famous person or an actor or so good looking you're a model. It all depends on what you decide to do.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I want to say here. One is I think it's been very much implicit here, but I want to make it explicit. The profound impact on the idea of victimhood here. Because while we talk about how we're victims as children, and we've talked about how adults are not victims, this is a third and most upstream frame for it. Because if we choose our childhood and we choose our parents and we choose our attributes, even the things that as adults we can't change,
yes,
it means we're not a victim to anything.
Yes. In the most meta context. That's
cerebral
right.
palsy, poverty-stricken childhood, physical or sexual abuse. In the most meta context, we chose all of these things.
All of them. That's
an incredibly challenging frame, even for me to take on, and I've been mulling on it for like 15 years. So it's a challenging aspect of the paradigm.
Yeah, because so much identity is, well, if only I'd been born to rich parents, or if only I didn't have the big nose that I have, that my mother used to say looks like a green pepper on my face.
Oh, God.
Not jokingly.
I believe you.
And so if you get that meta context of absolutely no victimhood, even when you a dice roller, incarnative dice roller, you still chose to let the system take over, so you're not a victim. That's the imprint that the fractals of which are exposed as not bona fide when later we act out victimhood, because the original meta context is seeded with not one shred of victimhood. So nothing that happens to us, if I walk out into the busy street looking the other way and a drunk driver kills me, my contribution was I was looking the other way, not just because I was innocent and a drunk driver killed me. We all have input in the most banal ways to everything that happens to us. We don't cause it, but we are part of its contribution in such a way that we can never be full victims of anything.
Yeah, this is
it's all seeded.
It's a completely different existential frame, because it really means we're active participants with reality
Yes.
at like the level of causality, not
At the
just as
level.
hapless bystanders of things happening to us.
Exactly right. And here's something that would utterly change the human experience, right,
Hmm.
Joseph? If this became pandemically spread, if this
Hmm.
idea became pandemically spread, because it forms everything down to the smallest details of our lives, where we are co-creators of life. When you hear someone say, "I co-create my own reality," well, you can have a belly laugh or you can shed a tear for this poor person. Everything is co-created. We do not choose our life or have our life in a vacuum. Everything is co-created by our influences and our connections with others and all the energies involved with that. No one creates their own reality by themselves. What we do create is our response to our reality. We
Hmm.
don't create our own realities. It's a worldwide thing. But we do create our responses to our realities, and
And
that's a tragic error.
yeah, and you used to, I wonder if you would still hold this. You used to say one way of defining our protection mechanisms is they are
Mhm.
our reactions to our reactions. You,
Yes, yes, that's right. That's right. Our protection will rise because there's a primary reaction of pain or anxiety or rage or depression or shame to what happens to us. And the protection is a reaction to that reaction. It says, "Oh no, here, I don't want you to feel that rest of my soul. It hurts too much. So I'm going to cover you up and protect you." And that becomes the shadow. And
Mhm.
that's why another thing with EBE is that we completely redefine the shadow is not something to get rid of. It's something to be embraced and brought along the journey with us. If we heal it, it's not about making it bad. It's about realizing it had good reason to form in the first place.
Mm.
So again, no victim to even our shadows. Our shadows are our own souls contracting in protection of some reaction, painful reaction we've had to some life experience.
Which we co-created by choosing the life
That's
experience, or at least the parameters of it in the first place. So that
exactly
means
right.
we choose the elements of ourselves and the elements of our experience to produce our own shadows in very specific ways,
Precisely accurate, according to identity.
so that we can outwork those shadow issues. Which, wow.
That's right. Now, we have to make one distinction between for soul age here, though, Joseph. The first 50 or 80 soul lifetimes here, we don't have a clue on what we should choose, right? And so guides to
Kind of
give
like
us,
the first 20 years of any
there you
any
go.
individual's
Yeah,
life. Yeah.
exactly. There's a fractal of it.
Hmm.
And guides will guide us into certain scenarios to begin the process. And we have no clue what to do with that. When we talk about we're fully chosen into our dynamics and there's no victimhood, applies to 150 lives and more here on the last 130,000 years. And so younger souls, they agree to have their setup done by guides, and they're informed of that a lot of times ahead of time. So their agreement in that is they trust the guides to give them wise beginnings to the very challenging experience of life on Earth. So even there's not much room for victimhood because they agree to the whole process. In other
What
words,
are
we pre-exist, not only post exist, like the religions say, we pre exist our birth, not just post exist our death.
hmm.
That's another whole
Hmm.
meta context for everything we're saying. It's an assumption, which I just realized we never said.
Yeah.
We different than religions, we pre exist our birth, not just post exist our death.
Yeah, and of course that changes everything. I mean, it's hard to conceive of if you don't have a sense of your own soul's journey. But it's a very
Yes,
different frame to start if starting with I've got one life and it's beginning and it's going to have an end, rather than that's in the middle of 1,000 lives, and some of them
yes,
have happened and some of them haven't. Uh,
exactly.
and so it makes me think that people might wonder, like, well, what am I doing then as a soul? What are common soul themes. And we've talked about the three fears. That's in the most meta. Identity
Mm.
says we're working on the fear of being, fear of not being, and the fear of non-being. But
Uh-huh.
what's like one level down from that? What are the typical incarnational imperatives and shadow themes that you see people working on?
The first and foremost is learning the difference between will and love.
Mm.
That's the most contextual downstream of the three soul fears that happen at soul birth, not the birth of each life. The birth of soul included these three contractions of being, but primarily the first theme to learn or begin to learn, begin to want to configure the healing of, is the difference between will and love as a primary driver of our human experience. We live in a almost completely will first suffused mode in our world. We will our way through survival. We will our way to what we call thrival. And we shoehorn love as a secondary, oh yeah, whatever. And when it's structurally the opposite, that we are primarily, divine being is primarily made of love and only secondarily expresses that love through will, as opposed to those who actually believe the original Old Testament Jewish religion. Basically, they were posturing a divine being, a God who was willful first and only secondarily expressed the willfulness lovingly, because half the time it wasn't lovingly, it was punishing.
Mm-hmm.
So that God needs to learn that it's the other way around. It was a false God all along. They did get right, of course, the main religions, that there is a divine being, a self-aware divine being. But they got all of its attributes and expressions and relationships to humans egregiously wrong.
So that's number one. Is there a number 2 and 3?
Yeah, once you start getting crushed between, or I'll say it the other way around, getting pulled in two different directions by will and love, eventually in between, in the fourth chakra, you start to get experience of the ramifications of doing all of one or all of another, all love or all will. And then eventually all these strategies that we have to learn to survive get in the way, where we have to use will to survive, but have to let go of will if we actually want to emotively, maturely thrive. And that's not something, that principle has not been out there in our world at all. That will is mandatory for survival. But thrival, people think that we have to keep using our will to thrive. And that's why the world is drowning in financial greed, corporate corruption, governmental mischief, and all this crap on all of our domains of being. It's a will-run world, which is why we've not learned yet as a planet, as a planet, to base our incarnational experience in love first.
I was talking with some people recently about the will versus love thing, and specifically about the will to manifest.
Yes.
And a metaphor came to me that the use of will is sort of like you want to dig a well to have, for all purposes, infinite amount of water, and you get like 10 feet down and you don't get to water, but you take a bucket and fill the well up by hand, once a day. And so it appears that there's water in this hole that you can drink from, but you've actually given yourself a job. You have to top it off all the time.
Yes.
So
from
50 feet away, it could look like, oh, this person has access to a well of water, but actually what they have is a job. And
yes.
What we're really looking for is an effortless font of soulfulness that will give us energy, rather than having to mentally and willfully push through it, which is basically what we're conditioned to do.
Absolutely. A great metaphor, Joseph. Another one that just comes to mind now, we use this metaphor in a lot of different scenarios, but the soulful way to manifest thrivability or wealth, if you want to say, or inner well-being or whatever, you have to willfully in some way choose to unplug will. You have to use will to unplug will. And that's like dropping a stone in a still pond. And then you wait for the waves that come out from that, dropping that big stone in the pond, to hit shore and then come back to you,
Ah,
right? Uh, there's a surrender after you use will to unplug will to draw not only survive thrive ability, but the real hardcore folks, they even unplug will for survivability. Those are the ones that ultimately trust divine being in everything. And if you do that too soon as an ideal in your soul experience, you're going to drown from that. That's why I said the secondary playouts are, how do I healthily balance love and will? And love involves trust of divinity, and will says only trust in me. So that is attraction in the fourth chakra that has to be exercised to get toned. So you've got dozens, if not tens of dozens of lifetimes to just figure out the basics of will versus love in their playouts of everyday life.
so are you saying that everyone, or maybe most people, have to hone their will significantly before they learn to put it secondary to love? Or do some people skip over that?
Well, there's actually an easy way to answer that question, even though it's a very complex question. And that is, ask yourself how people who were, let's make an image. A person has chosen to let love drive every decision they make right from birth. Okay, that's what they set up to do. How long will that person survive emotionally or physically?
Oh, right. Yeah. They couldn't survive their childhood.
Correct.
Mm.
They would die of a broken heart
Mm.
in some way if there wasn't a will-based self-protection
Uh-huh.
that kicked in. It's just the world as it is. It's not the ideal, but we're basically in a seventh and eighth grade level consciousness quotient on this planet.
Mm.
The preponderance of people are young souls and learning their lessons exactly as they should in many ways. But the most people are just the majority of people who are successful in life or have notoriety or wealth or become a internet idol. Um, these people are just teenagers who got older, emotional teenagers that got older.
Mm.
Look at Putin and most Trump is of course a perfect example, more in line with Putin. These are just teenagers who never grew up emotionally. They have no care. They don't have any empathy for their impact on others. They're sociopathically, if not psychopathically, endowed with a me greed of power, wealth, or notoriety. These are the teenagers of this planet are ruling the tweens and the children of this planet. That's the way identity sees it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a terrible, terrible evolutionary phase that we're now seeing productively and non-productively falling apart in front of our very eyes.
Yeah, and another sort of sequela from for what we've been talking about is that means that people who are, like you said, extremely successful, extremely wealthy, extremely famous, while the average person looks to those people as, well, that's like the pinnacle. I want that, and I suffer because I don't have that. If you just
Right.
scratch the surface of those people's lives, it's not hard to see that they very often, it seems, need that kind of wealth and notoriety to work the issues that they're working. I
Exactly.
I know someone who works for a billionaire whose name people would have heard, would know if I mentioned it, but and this billionaire, he tells me when he never drives himself wherever he is, he's got a driver, but if he's stuck in traffic, from the back seat would start like throwing a tantrum and start kicking the seat in front of him because he's so frustrated. And
Uh-huh.
imagine someone worth 5, 10, 15, 20 billion dollars who has like that much power, that influence, but is that triggerable by something as basic as traffic. It just makes me think like
Uh-huh.
it must be really painful to be him and to see
Uh-huh.
he's got that much power but still can be made to feel that powerless. That must be maddening.
Well, and wow, really well said, and a real life example on top of it.
Mm.
Uh, that means if he is triggered to that degree by something he can't control,
Yes.
all of his world is control mediated,
Yeah.
not genuinely open to life informing him of what his next steps are. There's no cosmic meta context, only his will and only his will to control his circumstances. That's the only explanation for throwing a baby boy tantrum in the backseat of his limo.
Yeah, and
Right?
it's stunning to think that that people need that level of success and wealth because their control gets blown up like a balloon, expanded, expanded, expanded. So they have more and more control, and yet it never really satisfies them, and then backlights the ultimate failure of control, which is the dead ending of a paradigm, dead ending of will. And some people need
Absolutely.
that.
Yep. They need a dead end in the whole lifetime as in a quote unquote failure in
Mm.
some ways to learn that. But it just occurred to me, Joseph. Wow, look at all the domains that a topic of reincarnation
Yeah.
affects and illuminates. I just would like just a moment here to say that um, what we just said is in the context of reincarnatability and the whole system. That the preponderance of the planet is populated by children's souls and teenage souls, um, and that they're going through exactly what they need, but identity can't really reach most of those people because either
Mm.
they're too young to ask the right questions about themselves,
Mm.
or they're too stuck in teenage will to be curious about other ways of living life than the way they were conditioned to do life.
Yeah.
Which is why we unabashedly say, I invented identity for souls that have been around the block enough to be at point with curiosity on how spiritual contexts impact human life. And that's a very small percentage of the planet, maybe 3%, 5%
Yeah.
of the planet. That's what identity is planting seeds for, and working out all its dharmas about that. Again, as we've said so many times, it's not elitism, it's just serving an underserved demographic, the
Mm.
older soul, the one who's been around the block. And an older soul is no better than a younger soul, blah, 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 blah.
Same way a rich person's no better than a poor person. It makes me
Exactly.
think of I'm somewhat embarrassed to admit I took an interest in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial a
Mm-hmm.
while back, and it was the most fascinating thing to me was listening to the recordings of their actual relationship conversations and battles, and it was like,
I mean, talk about sloshing in an ankle deep in depth of reality. Those two. I mean, how hackneyed and banal and immature their whole
yeah,
relationship.
and these are people with millions of dollars, depth of far more. But to just like I found myself marveling at how surprised I was at how immature they were.
Yeah.
Like you read you hear the attorneys reading the text messages going back and forth, and it's like
Yes.
this could be two 16-year-olds talking.
Exactly
And we
right.
get this idea of like, oh, well, because they're successful and have all this money, surely they must have a certain level of maturity. And it's actually very often the opposite, which
Well,
I'm naive, I guess. I don't know why that surprised me in that way, but
yeah, exactly right. And that is not only the case with most famous people in the domain of entertainment, but
mhm.
in politics, it's
Politics
even
even more so.
worse.
Yeah.
An older soul, 99% of people who get into legislative or governmental political arenas just want power and prestige and money, power, prestige, and money.
Did you
So
hear the recording from the councilwoman, the California councilwoman? You're in California, so this is like national news, but just broke in the last couple of days. There was a year old voice recording was released of a handful of council people making allegedly very racist remarks, and the
yes, yes,
councilwoman has already resigned. And it's like
right.
they weren't like maliciously racist remarks, in my opinion. It was just sort of uncaring, sloppy dialogue that was
Uh-huh.
like it wasn't not racist, but it wasn't like malevolently so either. It was just the people revealing their teenage consciousness.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be leaders.
Right. And that's the neo-pathology of it all, is that
Yeah.
how can you fault a teenager for fucking up? Sorry. But
Yes, right.
and yet they fuck up at a way that it affects downline like dominoes the non 1%
Yeah.
or the non 5% of the world, the power that they have to legislate and be paid off, that, as we said in our other one of our other podcasts, legal bribery and PACs and
Yeah.
and pharma and the NRA and big pharma bribing senators and representatives in this country. It's all teenage activity. So you can say, well, we live in a teenage world, but when a woman can't get an abortion after being raped, these legislators are ruining people's lives in many ways, whether it's a passive kind of unfunny racist remark or specific religious-driven agenda. It's just all teenage activity, and that's to keep our place here in reincarnation. This is how, only with a context informed by the reincarnation reality of things can we see a whole other level of emoto spiritual maturity / immaturity range, and it's tilted way in the to the degree of the emotively immature. So whether that emotional immaturity is because they're young souls or older souls who use will instead of love to drive their lives with no care about the afterlife or the remunerations and ramifications of karma, which I'd like to say a little bit more about.
Please,
too.
yeah, let's talk about karma. I think we did one episode on karma a while back.
We did. We touched on it. There's a couple other dimensions to it, though, I'd like to include. And first, I just want to say something that somebody wants to ask me, what is the meta context for reincarnation in identity's point of view, not how it works to, create equality and atonement and all that. And my answer was that just like we have to heal our local emotional body issues from our shadow and all of our wounds, and the wounds have to be healed in the same domain in which they were engendered, meaning all of our wounds happened in relationship to our parents, our peers, our brothers, our sisters, our uncles, our families, our cultures. So it was all the wounds happened in a relatedness frame, which means healing has to happen in a relatedness frame. And a person cannot do psychotherapy by themselves, can't do self-improvement by themselves. They'll hit dead ends and maybe wander around those dead ends thinking they're growing and they're not. You can circle, let's say you have a 10,000 foot mountain, you can circle at 7,000, circle around the mountain endlessly at 7,000 feet, and each time get a different viewpoint of, oh, there's that, and oh, I'm learning something here, but never climb an altitude. So that, in the same way.
Yeah, I want to say I've met people like that, and the phrase I use to describe them is they're spiritually and emotionally book smart.
Oh yeah, nicely.
It's like they can say all the words, and then when things get tight or uncomfortable, it's like the mental body embodiment of what they know becomes totally apparent because the immature emotional motives come through and cause them to behave in ways that don't fit the map that they have for what a mature person is, just because they never had anyone challenging them relationally.
Exactly right. And so in that sense, since you can't do your own growth alone except through insight and will, it's the same principle that drives reincarnation. If you start incarnating here and you start creating wound patterns and themes in your life, you have to keep coming back here. They have to be healed in the same earthen domain in which they were engendered. And that's the driving meta context for reincarnation. Thank God we have a divine being that saw its children would need.
But hold on a second. If our soul wounds were our deepest, the three fears, the fear of being, fear of not being, and fear of non-being, happened in a non-Earth,
Yes,
far more porous context. Why do
correct.
we have to come here to heal them? Why do we have to go? If it happens in a very porous, least dense place, why are we coming to the most dense place in order to heal them?
Well, not uncoincidentally, I asked Divine Being a similar question, not exactly,
Oh,
many,
I'm
many
honored
years
that you
ago.
had the same
Yeah.
question.
Oh, you say really? And the answer was it didn't know how difficult it was going to be. Um,
Mm,
remember we debunked the omnipotence
yeah,
and omniscience.
omniscience.
What the answer was in context, the best I can remember, is that once a reality got unfolded to this dense universe we call the physical universe, once that happened and living souls that came out of divine being wound up incarnating here, the three soul fears got unfolded as specific smaller fractals of those three soul fears. The terror of being is the predominant soul fear that people are incarnating to heal
But
here.
it's too big to feel all at once, right? So
Of
it gets
course,
broken down. Uh-huh.
absolutely. It gets downloaded gradually, so it's doably healable. 95% of the planet's travail is people working the first soul fear, the terrors of being.
Mm-hmm.
The very small who actively seek the terror of not being and the terror of non-being are far outnumbered. So Identity offers a track for all three, but mostly for older souls who can handle a lot bigger contexts for behaviors
So
than
if
others.
someone were to, if you could snap your fingers and then cause someone to feel all of their fear of being, they'd all at once, they'd probably go irreparably mad, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they'd short circuit. Consciousness would be short circuited. It's just like diving deeper. You've got to acclimate at
Yeah.
each of the levels. Another good metaphor
Or
for
climbing
that.
a mountain, same thing,
Or climbing a
elevation.
mountain.
Yeah.
Same. Even though there are those who climb Everest without oxygen.
Yeah.
Boy, talk about overcompensators, huh?
That's a whole other rabbit hole. I know you and Bree have been watching that Everest show that I recommended just to see the astounding motivations and things that people say and the projections onto wanting to conquer the mountain as if it's fighting with them. I found it amazing.
Or I found it amazingly astounded at that grown people were offering incense and gifts to the mountain so it would allow them to climb. I mean, and to talk about banal, the some of the personality constructs of these people who and what they go through when they hit the wall climbing.
Yeah.
I rest my case. Teenagers, they're all teenagers who got older. They're all serving self images,
Yeah.
not the self. The vast majority of people, even attained people, are serving self images, not their actual soulful self.
Mhm.
So it's a real mess. And it's embarrassing to be able to see all this because we're all children of God, and that you and I might discern the immaturity. The discernment doesn't become a judgment until we withdraw love and empathy for the people. But we
Yeah.
can't help discern what we see. You see?
That's what was so interesting for me in my own experience watching. I forget what it's called. It's like an Everest reality thing on Netflix. I think it's on Netflix, and it just kept hitting me like I could see through the motives of these people and how unhealthy what they were doing was for them. But at the same time, a total respect for they need to do this. Like
Yes.
they
Yes.
need to do
Right.
what they need to do.
Absolutely.
And
Right.
it's crazy and it's not helping them, but they also
Right.
need to do it. It's a
Yeah.
weird and that was just kept me watching it.
A good 40 to 50% of our decisions in the incarnative ladder are meant to show us dead ends.
Yeah.
And we've got to hit those dead ends before we can, the next set of lifetimes, break through those dead ends. So that's why whoever dead ends in thinking like the billionaire who throws a hissy fit because he can't control traffic like every other aspect of his life.
Like every other.
Like this guy, I guarantee his relationships are in the toilet, whoever he is,
Yeah.
no matter what the public picture is of that of that relationship. So the point here being that in terms, let's downshift again to karma, which we just got a little bit off. I want to say a couple more things. One of the most important additions or changes that identity offers the planet in terms of karma is that what appears to be future life penances that we pay for our sins, quote unquote, or our inhumanities to each other is only the surface dimension of it. Does a person who sexually abuses a child have to one day be a child to understand and incorporate on their healing path what it felt like, the impact of being invaded at such a young age? Yes, of course, but that's not the whole story. What has to happen here is that perpetrator gets its first taste of atonement by becoming the abused. Okay, but then that's in service of that becoming the abuse, is in service the beginning of atonement. But what has to happen next after that,
not as a punishment, but so they can have the experience.
So they can have the experience, not a punishment. And secondly, that's in service and on the way to finally forgiving themselves for their perpetration in the first place. So the end game of karma is self-forgiveness, not punishment. And since we can't reincarnate as a cockroach,
as if that would be so bad.
Yes, as if that would be so bad. Did you notice though in the news they just successfully implanted human brain neurons into mice?
Yeah, I read the story about the brain cells in the petri dish that were able to play the 70s video game Pong, which I thought was awesome.
Yeah, and they're going, how can even stem cell induced neurons in a petri dish have that kind of power? Well, then, again, everything's ensouled. Everything is ensouled from inorganic to organic. And it's the soul context that is the origin of consciousness, not brain cells. Brain cells in the human nervous system mediate our soulful, previously already existent consciousness. It mediates it here. It doesn't create it, like we said last time. That's why I wanted to say a little more about consciousness too, which might go to a part 3 on this also. But karma is you think you avoid karma, and here's where religions came in, even though they don't have karma in their picture. Christianity's especially, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, right? That supposedly, if you follow that, you'll get into heaven. But it's not a bad application also to reduce your karma if you have an Eastern point of view, right? But I have seen, believe it or not, even though it's the exact opposite, I have heard people say that do unto others as you would have others do unto you is the same thing as I get to do to you what you did to me.
Oh, dear.
When it's exactly the opposite. I've seen people justify that for the eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, until we all go blind and have no teeth left, right? So do unto others as you would have others do unto you is fine. A reasonable, when interpreted correctly, is a reasonable way that you could say karma works. If the more you do unto others, blah, 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 the less negative karma you'll accrue.
It's great bumper sticker metaphysics.
It is bumper sticker because identities says, well, this is ankle deep sophistication in terms of consciousness, because do unto others is all based in behavior, not motive, not intention. And so it's good for kids, for young souls and some teenage souls who want to be good people. But identity offers that because we're emotive beings first, not physical beings or energetic beings first, changing behaviors is not the key to healing your soul. What the karmic rule or principle in identity's point of view is, as you unconsciously sow, so shall you consciously reap. In other words, we all have deeply wounded motives that are unconscious to us that drive our intentions, actions, and outcomes. The motives are largely unconscious to us. And Mother Teresa, for example, intention to serve the poor, which was lauded and will be lauded for centuries to come, forgets about the motive that she was an employee of Vatican Inc.
Mm-hmm.
And Vatican Inc. requires its employees to have low self-esteem.
Oh, wow.
You can't
That's a
join
statement.
unless you have unconscious or semi-conscious low self-esteem, which it repackages as humility.
And then rewards you for,
and
because
then
it's the way you
reward.
get to heaven.
Oh my God. Poor Al, I think her first name, no, that was no, yeah, Alice. I think, was it Alice? I forget what her real name was. At any rate,
Sounds right.
As an employee of Vatican Inc., she had horrific self-unworth because she abides by a religion that says we're all originally sinned, which means you're not worthy as you are born. You can only become worthy if you earn worthiness. And her unconscious motives, after she died, I had a short conversation with her, and she was starting to realize that all of her service to the poor was just so she could get into heaven. Mm-hmm. All that was unconscious to her. Bless her heart. And she was not 7-8 weeks after her death did I get that download with her. Well, she was realizing it. There's
a whole other rabbit hole here that just hit me. I was thinking about like university ethics classes where they talk about, like that classic example of there's a train running down a track and you have the hand on the switch and it can kill these 20 people or this one person who you love. What do you do, or whatever the thing is. And those ethical dilemmas are always framed at the basis of behavior. What would you do?
Yes, exactly.
Not what is your motive.
Or not why you would do it.
Why you would do it.
Why you would do it, right? Mm-hmm. All of the grown-ups on the not that many on the planet always look for why they do what they do, not whether what they do is good or not. That's all teenage stuff, childlike and teenage stuff. So in that sense, I think delve one more around the circle here with this. As you unconsciously sow, so shall you consciously reap. Meaning, if you don't attend to your unconscious, which we've not had good dharmas to access, you're going to consciously reap the downsides and the upsides of your unconscious motives. That's the driver of karma. It's because we have to get more aware of our soulful expanse, which includes the unconscious. What's unconscious to us, what we were conditioned to. The unhealthy motive or the wound-based motive of Mother Teresa about only wanting serving the poor, meaning the poor were an X factor as a means for her to get to heaven. That was an unconscious motive of her, which is classic for someone who's told they're unworthy from birth, right? Mm-hmm. The Catholic Church, in this case, breeds unconscious motive woundings of unworth. It's their stock in trade. They require it, so later on they can control not the electorate, the chosen, those who choose in Catholicism.
Yeah. And
that's just one religion. I'm not picking it out on purpose, just because I know a lot about it, having been reared in it, rear-ended in it is a better way.
Oh, wow.
Right. So, in other words, if it's as you unconsciously sow, so shall you later in the lifetime or in future lifetimes reap.
In your self-interest to learn about yourself.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. I unconsciously sowed a narcissistic, sociopathic orientation to my truths and made people pay if they didn't agree with it, not because they were bad, but because to a part of me, they were ignoring their own soul call by rejecting my advice or my guidance or whatever. Now, this is narcissism and sociopathy in spades. And I have an upcoming, I'm trying to get a talk going at the local Unity Church of Confessions of an Ex-Guru, where there's a lot of interest in what's going on with these enlightened gurus, and why do they always why do they fall from grace? And I
Mm.
have a whole lot to say personally
Yeah.
about that. But the point is, as I unconsciously sowed those wound-based motivations in how I related to the truths of the paradigm, I had to consciously reap. And that conscious reaping was the collapse of the nonprofit that governed the school that I had founded, and I've been through a terrible, difficult 7 years of learning what the hell happened. So there's karma right there applied to me, and it applies to all leaders or heads of family or whatever, every human being, that to one day have to learn about their unconscious motives that drive their conscious intentions, which then drive their actions and outcomes. So our soul consciousness is so wide, it includes the unconscious, and that's not something that's often hardly ever understood in consciousness research. Wait a second, what's the underlying motive for what you're so proud of intending?
And as a society, I think about the revelations of a guru is just one example of so many things that happen in our society. We talked about that councilwoman in California whose
yes,
immature behavior surfaced. I think of Louis C.K., of one of my
yes,
favorite comedians, who just got dragged through miles of broken glass and barbed wire for his indiscretions. And
right,
what pains me is, like, this is what's going on for everyone, but there's no societal structure to actually help people with it. They either
yes,
have to deny it
right,
or be underwater with shame about it, lose money, people boycott their obvious talent, which doesn't really help anything. They resign from their position at whatever
right.
oil company. It doesn't work. It's not helping anything. I mean, in some ways, of course, there needs to be some painful thing
Yes.
to underlie the situation, but it
Yeah,
doesn't
without
help
that,
really.
well, without that negative, they can't experience the dead end.
Yeah. Okay. So
So they
something
can
has to happen, but
some sort of sequela. You can't just let these kinds of things go, as you're saying here. But what's the degree is the right question to ask.
yeah.
Louis is back on the circuit, or is trying to be back on the circuit after being canceled. But the whole cancel culture, which we had an earlier podcast
Yeah.
on, there's always a reason, but identity offers, wait, stop the presses. How about we just let everybody do exactly what they want to do, and so as to expose their dark motives. Don't cancel someone says like Yee now. I guess we have to call him Yee, with this tirade against.
Kanye West. Oh, no.
Yes. Oh my God. I mean, of course. I mean, to marry a Kardashian in the first place is a question for
It
sanity
raises
alone,
some
right?
questions.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But his anti-Jewish tirade.
Mm.
They want to cancel it. They cancel his TikTok or whatever
Uh-huh.
twangy, tweety thing he's on these days. They've canceled it. But wait, what? Let him keep going and expose all the aspects of his, let's say, deranged consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And let's let everyone see it. If you cancel it too soon, you make a martyr out of them, and then you get a
Yes.
following of a martyr.
Which may be happening with Trump as we speak.
Exactly right. So
Mm-hmm.
this is why whatever the January 6th tribunal
Yeah, it was just subpoenas.
uncovers, yeah, it's all real good stuff. And he's got to pay somehow, or else future ones will do exactly this. Future presidents will do exactly. There has to be precedents made. There has to be some legal redress, right?
Mm.
Yet to cancel his social media, wait, let the guy hang himself by his obvious delusions. Let him free speak.
It's a kind of playing God. It's like not trusting karma, which is an aspect of the intelligent design, capital I, capital D, which
Right.
will work its way out between, choose the person, Trump, and life itself.
Right.
Rather than trusting that, we feel
right.
like we've got to play God and go in there and interfere, because otherwise there won't be justice.
Exactly. If we let the dark side unroll, we're at choice whether to give it our personal venue or not.
Hmm.
I laugh at Kenya. I mean, I can't even, I cry about Trump most of the time because he is a child of God, but this guy is a failed experiment of a human being
Wow.
in so many ways. But my heart goes to him. Look at the father he had. At
Yeah.
any rate, let them rant and rave their lunacy. Oh, we have to stop it because MAGA people will create violence then. Well, then we deal with that violence.
Hmm.
You can't counter cancel cancel culture has to be counter canceled in a bigger picture where it's the degree not of cutting them off but of letting them continue to expose their bull so we can all go. And if more people buy into their bull because they're not canceled, well, that's the way of things.
Yeah.
That's the way of things. So becomes a not a red or a blue issue. It's a mixture of the two because there's red distortions and there's blue distortions. The only difference is the blues at least try to do the right thing according to a moral stricture that the reds don't have but think they have with their Christian nationalism, right?
Mm.
So, but they're both messed up on both sides. The elephant and the donkey are kicking each other to death, and our democracy is suffering.
Mm.
But that's another whole story. But the
Yeah.
karma here does apply. Uh, uh, Whatever unconscious wound drove Louis C.K. or Kanye with White Lives Matter now,
Hmm.
but Jews don't, even though they're somewhere not dark skinned
White
or
adjacent, depends on who
yeah,
you
right.
ask.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, give me a break. Um, if we don't let their garbage start to smell by letting them drown in their own misconceptions, as a world, as you say, we're playing God, and we think we're doing good, but we're actually putting off the collapse. We're putting off the collapse because you've got people who are so young in soul that they back these delusionists. They
Yeah.
back these people who've got dark motives and or literally modo mental problems, really big ones.
It
So,
makes me think of the thing from a couple of years ago. I think it was in Boston, the bakery that wouldn't make a wedding cake for
oh
two
yes,
men,
right,
and
yes.
brought up all this controversy about what the role of government is. And I believe the libertarian
Yeah,
perspective on that is like, let them do the commerce, and if word gets around that this bakery doesn't serve gay people, then they'll hang themselves with that rope, and let that
exactly.
just happen.
Well, again, we now look what we're talking about here, Joseph. Um, uh, we want to save Jews from feeling criticized by Kanye's remarks. Wait, that's their business. That's their business to
Hmm.
digest, not ours to babysit. If
Hmm.
a Jewish person is offended by what Kanye says, they need psychotherapy stat. Um, who cares what a crazy person, no matter how talented musically, who cares what they think about you? Why would you care whether or not Kanye criticized you or not?
Yeah.
So who are we to play? You say play God, or I would say play babysitter.
Yeah, play
Like
parent.
it's become a world now where we have to watch out. We can't offend anyone. Everyone is so, oh, if you offend my feelings, I'm going to sue you.
Right.
This is insanity squared, cubed, and squared again. That we're so thin-skinned now, we can't take insults.
Mm.
I
That's the
mean,
trigger warning culture we talked about before. But at the same
exactly.
time, there's a context for that. That is the emergence of individual feelings being important. It's
Yes,
just taken too far.
exactly right. That was my next statement
Mm.
altogether. Just because we're over coddling our poor injured feelings
Hmm.
on the one side, now on the other side, thank God we're finally having a conversation about impact.
Yeah.
uh, but not suability as the answer. It's why did that, an hedonist will say, why did that hurt me so much? And then figures out there's a wound in them that was hurt by some bozo like Kanye talking.
And
So
that's a really cool rabbit hole right there, is feeling the impact that an other has on you
yes,
all the way
all
without
the
playing victim.
yes,
Super
that
easy thing to say. That's something I'm working on in myself right now.
you bet. This is what a piece of that I've been working myself the last 7 years too. So you have to take it all the way down without being a victim. And then you know that if you had earlier in the process demanded a canceling of that person who hurt you, you realize all you were doing was reacting to what your daddy did to you, or your mommy, or the pedophiliac in the Catholic Church. So let's look at everything as a trigger instead of a cause. And then we're going to be soulfully investigative as to why we have our big reactions, right? So I don't think, did you get to a couple other questions you had?
We got to almost all of them. So
Yeah?
I wouldn't add any more. I think this might be a good place to close unless you have something else.
Well, let's just revisit another short revisit here, and then I think we can close. Identity's three dharmas, which address the terror of being, the terror of not being, and the terror of non-being. These were created at our birth of soul way back in the day, way before this planet ever got civilized, uncivilized by self-aware consciousness. Identity's whole dharmic system is about transmuting our conditioned fate into our heart-based destiny. So let's just unpack that for a moment. All of our woundings, all of our challenges that play out in our lifetimes, those are all conditioned into us artificially, secondarily, by the fact that we chose a family who will abuse us or neglect us, or a culture that will enslave us or liberate us, or a business or working for a boss who requires sexual favors to get a raise. All those we chose to get triggered by, and most of the time almost all the time we're conditioned into those triggers. We're conditioned into them. So that's a fate. We're fated to be conditioned into our present version of ourselves unless we do something different. Everyone by default is living their conditioned fate unless they start to go beyond our conscious intentions into their unconscious motives, where all the wounds lie, 90% of the wounds lie. They peek up in some of the intentions and actions and outcomes, of course. But in the end, identity wants to help your conditioned fate turn into your heart-based destiny, because whatever it is you set up to heal this life, in this lifetime, because of the amazingly, glitteringly beautiful and difficult modem of reincarnation, we get to have a choice to heal. And identity gives us, so far than any other paradigm in my experience anyway, a wider place to find our individual unconscious motives to heal, a more space to heal than previous paradigms, either psychological or spiritual. So to turn our conditioned fate into our heart-based destiny is to fulfill the incarnative imperative that we set up our lives, our A destiny. Here are these four things that primarily I want to attain this life. And here are the two things that if I can get, it would be good for me to get or not get, depends on whatever the dynamic is. So my incarnational imperative was to bring specifically my very familiar spiritual life consciousness and translate it into the human in a way that I never have in other lifetimes. And that collapse that happened of the nonprofit, which has another whole interesting context for it, was the only way that I would wake up to what I hadn't done in my personal domain. So it was the best and the worst thing that ever happened to me. In that sense, if you're on a spiritual track, things will happen to you over and over again until you get it. If you're on a conscious spiritual track, divine being never gives up on us. I had 3 other minor ruptures with smaller less conscious folks than there were in the last time. And those were all warm-ups to finally it had to be done with some really powerful people, good people. And I had to be dethroned. My wound-based shadow had to be dethroned. And thank God it did, because I have a chance now to fulfill my main incarnational imperative. And that is to, instead of just living on will and wisdom, I'm living primarily from love and compassion in my secondary relationship to will and wisdom. So in those ways, an informed human life, we need help with it. I needed help more than anyone, or as much as anyone, if not more. So reincarnation.
I'm sorry, I just want to grab this. There's a good clue in there for our listeners. If you find yourself continuing to run into the same negative situation over a number of years, it's probably an incarnational imperative knocking at your door. I think anyone over 30 or 40 could relate to that. Yeah,
it took me 3 knocks on the door before the door was kicked in on me, because I was not emotionally equipped to deal with it earlier in my life. And so in that sense, I would urge those who are skeptics about reincarnation, investigate it, ask us the tough questions, come to the next seminar or call in on a podcast or something like Clubhouse, which we do now. One day soon we'll have a call-in situation here with Joseph and I.
I'll take requests. Anybody wants to be live on a podcast?
Ask questions. Just absolutely. So in that sense, be grateful that reincarnation is a fact, even if you deny it right now, because even if you deny it, it gives you the freedom to deny it. Yeah. So, one last thing. Last thing, I promise.
Okay.
Why do we forget our past lives?
Yes. Good question.
Really important. Really quickly, because if we were in touch with the hundreds of lives we had before, we'd never have a focus enough to get the job done in this life. Every life, it's a perfect example of how now and eternity are equivalent. The now and eternity. Eternity is experienced now and now and now and now. It's not endless time. It's now and then now and now and now. And now there's no time. It's it's segmented that way into nows. Same principle here. Unless we mainly forgot what our incarnational imperative was, what was life before we were born, we would not give it the necessary focus to make now this life the priority. Only by bracketing it, this is my only life, are we going to get down to business and unconsciously fulfill our incarnational imperative.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention just a practical, it's hard enough keeping your head around one life, much less if you remembered even 2 or 3 as well. It would be just overwhelming.
Yeah. And so in that sense, we have to forget, but that's not a hard and fast rule. You can learn how to remember if you put your heart and soul to it, not your mind. Your mind will never teach you how to gain third eye access. So if you want to learn how to cultivate that, identity has a track for you on that also. So that's why the first question most basic people are, why don't we if what you're saying is true, why don't we remember? Well, you're conditioned not to remember for some good reasons, but you can decondition from that too if you like.
If you like, you may not like what you remember.
No, that's for sure. Yeah. When a couple of my past lives got exposed, I was so embarrassed to realize that soul of me did that part of me, that earlier version of me did those things. It's crazy making to me, and to learn self-forgiveness for that has been really tough. So,
well, on that sober note, thank you, Stace. I don't know where we're going next, or maybe more to say on this subject, but this was a really rich conversation. Very grateful for it.
You betcha. And you're welcome, and thank you for the opportunity.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Stace. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, we wish you well on your journey. Thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. To learn more about Stace Barron and Identity, please visit identity.org. To learn more about Joseph Shapiro, visit clearandopen.com. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey.